In the Marvel The End series, we last talked about how Venom faces their end. Well, in today's video, we're gonna go over another. Let's talk about Punisher, The End. Let's get to it, true believers.
You call me the Punisher, ain't that right? The big bad Punisher.
Let's confront a harsh, indisputable reality with regard to the Marvel Universe. Frank Castle is just a person in a world where radioactive monsters, true gods, and reality-warping mutants have taken over. The Punisher may be a highly skilled, extremely deadly, and terrifyingly focused man, but ultimately, he is nothing more than flesh, blood, and bone. He is literally pushing himself into a downpour of gunfire each time he ventures out into the dirty streets to carry out his one-man war on crime. For decades, we have witnessed him avoid direct explosions, overcome overwhelming odds, and outgun large criminal organizations that, by all reasonable standards, ought to have turned him into Swiss cheese right away. As fans, we've always understood deep down that a man who lives this aggressively will eventually die. Let's face it, Frank Castle has been using plot armor for years. It's impossible for anyone to remain this fortunate indefinitely, and that luck ultimately, unavoidably, expires. Finally, the harsh truth of Frank Castle's mortality is presented to us in the desolate, merciless, and memorable pages of Punisher: The End. This isn't just another near miss in which he withdraws to a safe haven to utilize duct tape, his own determination, and a few painkillers to mend himself. This is the last, ruthless finish to his never-ending war. The Punisher's death is depicted in this comic book.
They call you the Punisher. Prove it.
For readers who may not know, Marvel's The End series was a masterful publishing endeavor that sought to address a single, persistent query. How does it all come to an end? These independent books gave Marvel's greatest heroes and anti-heroes definitive, concluding chapters, deviating entirely from the mainstream continuous continuity. We witnessed the terrible final moments of the Fantastic Four, Wolverine, the X-Men, and the Hulk. However, Punisher: The End is far superior to all the other amazing books released under this umbrella. It is widely regarded as one of the best Punisher stories ever told, in addition to being the highest rated The End story ever issued. It takes a great team of artists to put together a work of art this grim. It was written by none other than Garth Ennis. You're familiar with Ennis if you have any knowledge of the Punisher. He's the wicked genius who brought the world The Boys and Preacher, and the mastermind behind the critically acclaimed Punisher Max series. Ennis treats Frank Castle more like a dreadful force of nature than a conventional superhero, because he has a deeper understanding of him than nearly everyone else. Ennis collaborated with renowned artist Richard Corbin to achieve this post-apocalyptic vision. Corbin's gritty, horrific, and intensely dramatic style was ideal for a dying world. He was well known for his groundbreaking, hugely influential work in Heavy Metal magazine, his renowned underground comics, and his critically praised horror and fantasy art. Punisher: The End exposes us to a radioactive nightmare, a post-nuclear wasteland, where humanity has all but perished. However, an old, radioactively contaminated Frank Castle continues to wander among the poisonous ashes. Before he can let the curtain fall, he has one last task to complete and one last set of targets to punish. It is terrible and cruel, yet it is an appropriate farewell. Readers like me might ponder upon questions like whether Frank Castle is a tragic anti-hero, a fascist fantasy, or just a symptom of a diseased society. To find out, keep an eye at the horizon and get ready for the day when the war is finally ending. Typically, the comic unfolds in the years following World War III. The governor orders the execution of Sing Sing's detainees over the phone while the war is already underway. The governor and Charlie, a close political subordinate, are seated across from each other in the room. As he gives the order to arm roughly 12 soldiers and go toward D Block, the governor reports that Mr. Ferris is on his way with the keys to the armory. He adds that since the inmates have been detained for the past 6 days, they may be anticipating the execution attempt. Like us, Charlie, a symbol of bureaucratic obliviousness, is confused by the order for mass executions and asks what it means. The governor responds that it indicates an impending war. He explains that the order he provided on the phone call came from Albany and would not have arrived if the situation had been reversible, while Charlie reacts with dismay to morally disastrous actions. What caused the governor to issue an order to execute a number of prisoners in a mass execution is a question that remains in my mind after this conversation. Were the authorities expecting a complete collapse of the infrastructure? Is it a confinement strategy prior to the collapse of society? Or did they not want armed prisoners to roam the streets in a post-apocalyptic world? According to the governor's succinct response, the Chinese want those tanks removed from Burma and the Dublin peace talks cannot be resumed. He goes on to say that they cannot allow drug dealers and killers to run free in the radioactive wasteland. When Charlie asks how long the war will last, the governor responds that it might last tomorrow or the following week, and that the missiles have about an hour to fly over the pole before they are already en route. Though he seems shocked and upset by the governor's directives and the impending apocalypse, Charlie, who represents state authority, becomes a facilitator of state violence, normalizing morally disastrous actions. He decides to stay and have a drink despite the governor's suggestion that he return home to his family. It's noteworthy to see the thematic irony that Ennis presented here, which is that the state issues instructions for mass executions so as to keep the order, but that the state itself explodes in nuclear fire just moments later. The comic then introduces us to the squad of armed and designated troops who will carry out the mass execution. As they approach D-Block and converse among themselves, they mention men like Vix and Maskey as examples of other D-Block inmates, hardened criminals that Frank had already killed within the jail prior to the execution order. The D-Block, which was opened and refurbished in the 1950s to become a nuclear-proof hideout fully furnished with food and water, is located directly beneath that, as we discover from their talk in the hallway. One of the soldiers who led this task provided us with this information. A trooper then mentioned an inmate who had a reputation for severe violence and had been waging a private war against crime for around 40 years. As he grew older, he was sent to Sing Sing. He had a reputation for taking matters into his own hands and killing offenders inside the prison, even while he was confined. This way, he murdered 36 prisoners in the first month. He kills every powerful man he comes in contact with, despite their best efforts to bring him down. All this time, it was Frank Castle, our main character, who was being discussed. The lights go out as the troops approach Frank's cell, only a few meters away. In addition to suggesting that the nuclear pulses have started and that significant infrastructure damage is about to occur, the abrupt turning off of the lights also made us readers resonate with the soldiers' increased level of terror shortly before Frank's cell. Frank Castle emerges from a hole made by the explosion in the next scene. A man named Paris Peters is spotted with him. It appears to me as if the two enter a post-human world rather than a post-apocalyptic one. The silence is not so much tranquil as it is accusing. Even yet, Frank and his friend will make it through the end of the world. Is survival, however, a triumph? As they began their journey toward New York City, they came across the nuclear nightmare. Frank told Peters that the clouds appear to be burning, and that it might take thousands of years for the air to become habitable. Frank also informed him that they would die eventually. If they were in the atmosphere, they would pass away a little sooner. But if they were in the cell, they would die in roughly 72 hours. Peters decides, nevertheless, to accompany Frank through the nuclear cemetery. He looks back in disbelief before departing, reflecting that he never imagined he would be free of the bomb shelter for the last year. After that, we run into Frank Castle, who addresses us. He announces himself by stating his name first, followed by his given name, Punisher. Following that, he presents his wife, daughter, and son, all of whom passed away in Central Park on a sunny day. He began to blame the malevolent men for their demise and continued to wage war against criminals such as thieves, killers, and parasites that prey on human frailties. Even as an old man, he felt he was here to seek revenge for all the sins committed by humanity. He therefore concluded that since the criminals never stop, neither will his war. What happens, though, if a man who is built for war survives a nuclear war? Don't you think he becomes more of a leftover and less of a man on Earth? Frank and Peter talk about the sights they see as they traverse the vast expanses of desolation. The landscape resembles a nihilistic western, and the walk through the dead American landscape is reminiscent of a funeral march. Numerous people's skeletons were strewn about. They saw individuals who were once all traveling to the hill were all unexpectedly attacked. There would have been more signs of panic remaining if this had been anything else. The engines are stopped by the electromagnetic pulse, Frank says, inviting a ready fallout. Once more, the narrative is directed at us. Frank introduces Paris Peters, a short con artist from Syracuse who was left at Sing Sing with Frank, and is later known to us to have unintentionally killed children during an insurance fraud arson. As they continued south, they witnessed scenes of silent extinction, such as fire trails from gunfight from a soup kitchen and refugee camps turned into burials. Ennis created one of the most depressing depictions of America, showing how fleeting remnants of life can suddenly turn into nothingness. Soon after they set out south, it began to snow soot, making navigation impossible. As a result, the two needed to spend the night in a school bus full of people who had committed assisted suicide. The history of the never-ending Third World War in action is then briefly explained to us. It started in Iraq before North Korea, Pakistan, and China quickly escalated the conflict with the United States and its allies. Almost all of human civilization was destroyed as a result of the nuclear exchange that followed. When Frank offers Peter something to eat, the latter responds, first a little annoyed, and asks why Frank is still going on. This is a question hard to answer, but one that is frequently thought about. He responds that there is still work to be done, specifically murdering. Additionally, he advises Peters to continue his good deeds, and he has no issue with that. Frank then tells Peters that Kenning, one of the high-ranking officials who planned the nuclear apocalypse and sheltered in a specialized fallout shelter, went insane and opened the hatches, exposing them to the radiation. He was shot, not by Frank, and was attempted to be eaten by them. Frank then declines to respond to Peter's further concerns. Frank Castle takes us through devastation while strolling through the remains of New York. He observes that Brooklyn took a direct strike, Jersey was devastated, and Manhattan was partially spared. This highlights the extent of the destruction. The planet Frank once fought to defend is completely dead, with not even an insect or rat surviving, and there are no safe zones left. Even though the Earth can absorb a lot of the onslaught, the air poses a genuine hazard to life. The two discover a vessel to gradually make their way through the Black East River as they proceed across the debris and bones of Long Island City. Peters also remarks on how dead the area has become since they left the shelter. They fail to uncover a single living bug, in contrast to their expectation of finding humanity, continuity, drive to overcome, and encounters with settlements. Peters and Frank soon reach Teacher Civilian Survivalist Enclave, a small survivalist group in the Midwest. We're going to learn a bit about who Teacher was later. He had provided Frank with a code that allowed him to enter the communal shelter. The trank gas rendered them both unconscious as soon as the gates opened. When Frank opens his eyes, he sees a community professional wearing protective gear against nuclear radiation. This is the first glimpse of life that Frank has ever seen since they left the shelter. Immediately after waking up, it becomes a little unnerving to find a figure in front of you wearing the quintessential nuclear ensemble. The individual disclosed that Frank is quite ill due to the excessive radiation he has been exposed to while walking around in the air without protection. Frank was also told that they had to sedate Peters because his suffering was too great for him to handle. At that moment, Frank spots a syringe at him and was told that adrenaline was necessary to keep him awake enough to respond to inquiries. Frank was more vigilant than ever despite his condition, and he grew suspicious when he saw two guards. He was informed that things were not going well there, and that there had been murders and suicides. As a result, no one is taking any security risks. He was then offered clothes of his size to change into from the ones already contaminated. Then, when the doctor questioned him about where he was and whether he had arrived in a shielded vehicle, Frank lost it once more. To everyone's, and our, amazement, he attacked the doctor, threatening to cut her suit so that she would become contaminated as well. He yelled for the two guards as well. Peters regains consciousness in the meantime. He is taken aback when the doctor assures him that they have a survival community with enough food and space, and asks him in a considerate yet persuasive manner why they are here. She added that because of the type of tissue damage they have sustained, Frank and Peters will both pass away by the next morning. There is nothing more that can be done, regardless of how properly they are treated. Attacking the doctor and the guards is therefore futile. We readers are left wondering why Frank never stops attacking. Is he acting out of habit, or is he genuinely seeking justice? This is particularly true because we shortly witness the doctor being shot by him in a split second. Frank immediately murders her since he believes she is one of the evil elites. When society is already extinct, Does punishment still have any purpose? Or is Frank Castle still trying to find the final shred of elite survivalism? The last concern is somewhat justified, as Frank proceeds to recount the story of some evil Frank thinks they made the world a terrible place to live. Their methods of controlling it were disgusting. These men went from being the best exploiters making money and enslaving nations to being brilliant salesmen. They exercised monopoly, turned presidents into puppets, and sold anything to anybody. Thus, eventually, the inevitable happens. Frank Castle tracks them down and exterminates them. This is where the comic's dystopian nature unfolds again. Frank and Peters travel toward Coven, a shadowy organization of powerful businessmen, politicians, and military officers that planned the nuclear war that wiped out civilization. With the selfish goal of reconstructing humanity after the end of the world, they took refuge in a safe bunker that was surrounded by military and password-protected enclaves while the rest of the world went down in ashes. Frank does indeed reach the Coven, as the next section merely verifies. At this point, we learn more about William Teacher's background and the reasons behind his desire for the Coven to perish. This section truly explores the complexity of Frank Castle's quest for justice coming full circle, which is why I find it so fascinating. MIT engineer William Teacher was hired to create the Coven for the elite in LA, Washington, New York City, and Dallas. He began to expose the Coven after gradually growing ethically suspicious about his role. He was soon taken to Sing Sing prison after being framed guilty. He got to know Frank Castle there. Problems eventually arose, and Teacher was stabbed. Is there anything more dramatically loaded than a dying person telling someone his final wishes? Teacher revealed all about Coven when he was dying. He added that they created a safety spell that was capable of withstanding the harm caused by World Wars II and III. With a stock of frozen human embryos, it could support life for hundreds of years and was constructed deep enough to withstand profound damage. To put it briefly, they understood how to take control of the future. All of that effort was in vain though, because Frank Castle managed to survive the end of the world long enough for radiation levels to drop so that he was able to reach the Coven. Now comes the time for Frank to take revenge on the last of the criminals. He puts them at gunpoint and hears their pleas for mercy because they are the last humans left, the means by which life on Earth could be sustained. Frank begins to fire just as one of them has finished speaking. Skimming the surface, readers may perceive it as a worldwide version of an ultimate revenge fantasy. Critically speaking, Frank Castle is the inevitable outcome of a society that has become dependent on violence to achieve moral clarity. Nations, systems, and pride destroy Punisher the End's world. Frank just completes what mankind began. The final, formal murder committed by Frank Castle is further emphasized in the comic. Even though it went unnoticed by us, Frank Castle was suspicious of how Peters, a con artist, got into D-Block. He admits that he was put in Sing Sing's D-Block when, as part of an insurance scam, he set fire to an empty house, unintentionally killing several neighboring kindergarteners when the fire got out of control. For the last time, Castle is let down by Peters' final admission of guilt. Paris Peters, the surviving criminal, is strangled by Frank. Frank Castle is shown strolling over the post-war wasteland in the ending scene, with flames all around him as though he had been set on fire. However, I believe the author has highlighted the scenario because of the nuclear fallout. He is devoid of any sense of triumph. A man whose whole identity was based on war at last finds a worthy conclusion. Not because it is explosive, but rather because it is calm. The climax is shattering. The gradual, unavoidable rhythm and the radiation's impression are like an unseen presence plaguing his senses. It's a bright morning in 1976. Since there isn't much traffic, Frank Castle is wondering if a cab will drop him off at Central Park in 20 minutes. As you may recall from the narrative, this is the location where Frank's family was murdered, the final scene before entering Central Park. So, it's an extremely devastating moment for him. He considers a route he might take to locate his family. He first chooses to travel west 66th, then sprints past the bar and the green, emerging from the trees into the sheep meadow. If he left his family there, he tries to remember. The thought of the nasty men with evil intentions still makes his blood boil. He genuinely hopes that this time, he will be able to save his family. That brings us to the end of this video. If you were hoping for an idyllic closure, you might want to consider twice. I'm saying this because a man who lived by killing had to die, today or tomorrow, It was inescapable. Despite my hopes for another last-minute turn of events that would benefit Frank, nothing of the sort happens. He dies. It's also intriguing that Ennis only makes passing references to the protagonist's death in several prior instances, rather than actually depicting it visually, as that could prove to be a bit harsh on our emotions. When our hearts are finally overcome by a deafening silence, a peculiar feeling of tranquility prevails, while we are still in the inertia of watching Frank fight. Ennis makes no exertion to redeem Frank. I think it's a well-earned conclusion when the world turns out to be as brutal and crooked as Frank always thought it was, and his private war no longer appears to be sheer madness. Do you believe that Frank was eventually correct? Or was he simply the final man left, awaiting his unavoidable demise? Give us your opinions in the comments section down below. We're only getting you started, so please like this video and hit the subscribe button for additional comic analysis that goes beyond the surface panels.